Hello, everybody. Hello, hello.
Good morning or good evening.
So, uh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in on the planet. I don't think anybody's dialing in from the International Space Center, but you guys are welcome as well. Um, Feel free to comment in the comment section where you're dialing in from. So we've got 440 registering guests on LinkedIn Live, where today we're going to be exploring the intersection between cybersecurity and quantum technology. This is a very relevant topic, a lot of conversation coming up. I was at Davos about 2 weeks ago, and there was a lot of talk about cyber implementing Y2Q, which I'm sure we'll get into, talking about Quantum Day, and some of these other very significant topics. I'm very lucky to be joined today by two experts in the field. I've got Eric Schmidtmeyer and also Will Oliver. I'll let them introduce themselves here in just a second. Eric is a special agent with the FBI in the cyber division. He and I were neighbors here in London. And Will is a professor of physics, electrical engineering, and computer science at MIT. He was also the director at the Center for Quantum Engineering at MIT. He is the director of quantum engineering at MIT, and also a member of the White House National Quantum Initiative Advisory Committee. I think his hardest job, though, was to be my professor and helping me pass my quantum courses while I studied them. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. And maybe, Eric, I'll go to you and I'll ask you to kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Steve, so much for the invite for today's talk. As Steve mentioned, my name is Eric Schmidtmeyer. I'm a supervisory special agent with the FBI. I currently work in our cyber division under a new program called the Global Partnerships Program. Preceding this, as Steve mentioned, I was one of our assistant legal attaches in our London office. So I lived in the UK for 4 years and worked out of the US Embassy. Now back stateside. I have been with the Bureau for 21 years now. I've worked in cyber my entire career in some form or fashion, whether it was out in the field, working cases at headquarters, program managing cases, or as I said, in London, working our international portfolio. So again, very happy to be here. Thank you, Steve, and looking forward to this.
Thank you, Eric. And Will, would you mind doing the same?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for organizing this, and Eric, a pleasure to be here with you too. So as Steve said, I'm Will Oliver. I'm the Henry Ellis Warren Professor of Physics and Electrical Engineering here at MIT. And I spent about 20 years at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory. That's our national lab here at MIT under the Department of Defense. And my research is in quantum computing. And I'll tell you that Steve was an excellent student in the class that we had.
And that wasn't paid. I'm not. But
it's true. It's absolutely true.
Thank you, Will. Good. So, I mean, we've got a lot to cover today. I want to make this a very interactive session. So we're going to be streaming on X, formerly known as Twitter. We're also going to be on YouTube. But for the people that want to message and ask your questions, we're going to be using the LinkedIn feed. So please send your comments through that if you don't mind. And what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be asking questions for the first 45 minutes of both Eric and Will. And then I'm going to leave the last 15 minutes to answer any live questions you guys may have. I can't promise we'll get through all the questions, but we'll definitely try. And so, yeah, if you don't mind, go ahead and message and let us know what part of the world you're dialing in from as well in the messaging. Eric, let me start with you. Facing the ever-growing, increasing amount of cybersecurity threats, how does the FBI cope with dealing with the new emerging technologies? And are there approaches to combat nefarious actors in this space?
Yeah, so the Bureau basically looks at emerging technologies in two ways, as new emerging threats and potentially as new tools in our toolbox. So specifically, with Will talking about quantum today, we understand that it is a threat and it is going to cause us problems. But at the same time, we have to be diligent and forward thinking enough to use that as a tool for combating those same threats. AI is another great example. While it might be easier for an adversary to conduct nefarious activity using AI, it's also a tool that we can use as part of our toolbox. And so that's really the way we look at it. We investigate this type of crime in much the same way we have for the last decade or so. It's just a matter of expanding our toolbox and getting better at our game so that we can combat the adversaries as they get better.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Excellent. Thank you for that, Eric. Will, let me go over to you. You've kind of heard about Eric and kind of how they combat. Maybe specifically for you, people want to know a little bit more about quantum computing. Can you kind of tell our audience what is quantum computing and what's the difference between that and quantum technologies?
Yeah, so quantum computing is a new paradigm of quantum or of computer, and it operates fundamentally differently than the existing computers, in fact, that we're using right now for this LinkedIn stream. As you may know, conventional computers are based on transistors, and they can be a digital 0 or a 1. That's it. They're either 0 or 1. And qubits or quantum bits, which are the fundamental logic elements of a quantum computer, they can also be a 0 or a 1, but they can be any superposition of those two as well. And that's a manifestly quantum mechanical state. And it leads to things like quantum interference and quantum parallelism, which give quantum computers substantial power in solving certain types of problems. Not all problems, but there are some problems where a quantum computer will vastly outperform any classical computer that we have. Now, to realize that promise, we need to build quantum computers that are large enough and powerful enough to take advantage of this quantum mechanical interference and parallelism. But we're on the road to doing that. The quantum computers we have today are relatively small, but nonetheless, we can demonstrate that they work. They perform algorithms and tasks as we would expect. And the next step then is to scale them up to large enough size that they can either be commercialized or perform some of these tasks that we're going to talk about.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So Eric, when we go back to cyber, in this space, are there resources that you would suggest that people can use to learn more about cybersecurity?
Yeah, so it is not nearly as taboo as it was 20 years ago when I started this, or even 10 years ago. Obviously, there is massive communities out there, both online and in person, that focus on cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity answers. So absolutely, there are ways to get engaged. And this is really directed at our U.S. audience today, but one of the programs the Bureau does that I think is just fantastic is our InfraGard program. We have over 50 InfraGard chapters around the U.S., usually tied to basically everywhere we have a field office. And these are not FBI run; these are FBI simply sponsored. We have an agent in each of those offices that kind of serve as the chairperson to coordinate it, but that's it. It is run by the private sector. It's a voluntary thing. You can join, and really they built it. And what they do is it's constant interfacing with their peers in industry to fight these types of problems and to become more aware of these types of problems. And really that's something that changed. Certainly from when I started this is private sector companies are not afraid to talk about these problems with their peers. Whereas before, I think it was, again, it was a little taboo. Like you didn't want to admit that you had a problem. And it's one thing coming to the FBI, which absolutely we're here. We want to talk about it, we want to help you. But sometimes it's more comfortable to talk about people that are dealing with the same problems as you are. So that is absolutely the best way to get smart on this stuff, is just talk to your peers. There's groups like this, and InfraGard is just one. It's just one that I hope that is near and dear to my heart, because I worked with them for a very long time. But there's ISACs as well, other community blogs, things like that are absolutely out there that you can join.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Will, let me go back to you. I think that there's a lot of conversation about cyber and the intersection with quantum computing. I was at Davos the last 2 weeks, and a lot more conversation about things like Y2Q, Quantum Day, or Q Day. So there seems to be a lot of conversations about how quantum will crack the RSA encryption. I know today it would take classical computers over 1 trillion years to do that. And there's a bit of boasting about how quantum can crack that. One of your colleagues there at MIT, Peter Shor, obviously came up with Shor's algorithm. Can you tell us a little bit about Shor's algorithm, and what does RSA encryption, what does it mean to RSA encryption once a quantum computer is strong enough?
Yeah, sure. So maybe we could take a step back. RSA crypto systems are called public key crypto systems because they enable two people to initiate a communication by sharing a secret key. You know, in the old days, maybe you've seen a movie where people exchange briefcases full of keys, or they you know, have some, you know, way to exchange a key personally, and then they take them to distant locations and communicate. But most of us haven't done that. We didn't exchange keys with our bank, and we didn't exchange keys with our work, etc. So the question is, how do you initiate that key exchange? And then once you've initiated it, then you can use conventional, what's called symmetric crypto systems to communicate. So RSA type crypto systems, or public key crypto systems, are critical to our, you know, modern day internet communication, because it's how we set up secure communication protocols. And in the mid 90s, Peter Shor, he actually had two remarkable, I would say, developments. And the first one bears his name. It's called Shor's algorithm. And it's a means to attack the RSA crypto system. And it's based on something called period finding. But what that translates to is factoring a large number into two constituent primes. And that's called a one-way problem. It means it's hard in one direction, but easy in the other. So if I'm trying to communicate with you, Steve, we can set up that communication and multiply two numbers together easily on our conventional computers to get that big number. But if an adversary or an eavesdropper tried to factor that big number into its constituent primes, that's actually very hard on a conventional computer. And if we ever felt that our level of security was being, you know, in some danger, we could just increase the length of that key, or the length of that big number we needed to factor, and it would become exponentially more difficult to find those factored numbers on a conventional classical computer. And what Peter Shor showed is that with a quantum computer, we can do that in a much faster time, like on a human time scale, as opposed to the, you know, the many years that you mentioned. And that's really the power of Shor's algorithm. Now, to realize it, we need to run it on a computer that's quite large. We don't have that quantum computer yet, but we have shown that the algorithm works, right? And so now the challenge is to build a quantum computer large enough to actually run it. And I'll just mention quickly that that was Peter Shor's second innovation, along with Steen and Calderbank. They together developed quantum versions of error correcting codes that would enable a large-scale machine, a large-scale quantum computer, to run long enough to actually do algorithms like Shor's algorithm.
Got it. Thank you very much, and thanks for explanation on that. I guess maybe should people be worried about that right now? I've got a lot of questions and people asking me, when is it going to happen? When's the date? And I know that there's different people with different opinions, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, sure. So there's two answers to that. And the first one is, when is it going to happen? And of course, we can't predict that. We won't have a shore capable machine today. It's beyond what we can do today, but people are working very hard. And so will it happen in 5 years? My personal opinion is probably not. 10 years? Well, I don't know. 15 years, 20 years, right? The point is that we often underestimate what can be done in a 10 or 20-year time frame. We overestimate what's going to happen right now or in the next year or two, but it gets fuzzier as we move out. Now, why this is important is because information that we are encrypting today protects important information that we want to maintain security over for 10, 20, 30 years. And even though we don't have a shore capable machine today, we will in the future at some point. And so it becomes, for businesses, a risk-benefit analysis. What do you feel is the likelihood for a shore-capable machine in 10 years, or 15, or 20? And at some point, wherever you place that Y2Q moment, at that point, your information will become susceptible to attack. And so that's information we're encrypting today that becomes susceptible to attack in the future. And so for that reason, the US government, through our National Institute for Standards, NIST, has been running a competition of sorts to develop what's called post-quantum cryptography. And those are crypto systems that we believe will be immune to attack by Shor's algorithm and future quantum computers. And so it's imperative that we develop those crypto systems and put them in place, not because we're worried about Shore today, but we're worried about Shore in 10 or 20 or 30 years. We all have information that we want to retain security over for those timescales.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely good, and thanks, definitely understandable. I'm going to ask you a little bit more about PQC and QKD here in just a second. But Eric, let me go back to you. From a cybersecurity perspective, do you think that the public really understands the level of threats that are out there?
Yeah, probably not. To Will's last point, I mean, he's talking about developing a defense for something that we haven't even invented yet, right? So that's how far we have to be thinking ahead of the problem. I don't think even in today's realm, I don't think people quite have a feeling for what we're talking about when we're talking about cyber adversaries, right? I think there's still this stereotype of the loner in the basement that's what a hacker is. It's really not. They are for all intents and purposes a business. They are very professionalized. They're very hierarchical. You will have coders. You will have directors. You will have an HR team. They are professionalized business. I mean, if you think of it, like compare it to kind of like organized crime. I mean, it's very, very similar to the way that organized crime worked in the mafia. It's very, very similar to that. Then you flip it to the other side. That's what I'm talking about in the criminal realm, and mostly ransomware and threats for financial gain. But flip it to the other side, and let's talk about the state-sponsored threats. That is tons of funding, tons of backing. It is again professionalized. Probably goes even beyond that term, right? Because it's literally what they're in place to do, and that's less about stealing money, going after ransoms, as much as it is going after intellectual property. And whatever your business is, you have something valuable to your business, right? Your business wouldn't be valuable if you didn't have something. We used to just refer to it as whatever your crown jewel might be. But think of what that widget is, or that idea is, and all the R&D that you put into developing that crown jewel, that widget, that idea. it's much easier for the adversary to skip that and just go ahead and take it, right, and steal it. And that's what state-sponsored threats really are. They're looking to take that intellectual property and redevelop it for themselves.
Got it. Will, I was looking at you kind of making any comments on that, or should I go to my next question for you?
No, I think no real comment, just agreement with Eric that, you know, we're here talking about quantum, but of course that's only one small piece of a very big issue that people like Eric are dealing with on a daily basis. And it is, in a sense, an organized crime. And it is something that nation states put a lot of resources behind, and we need to take it seriously.
Excellent. Okay, and so listen, Will, let me go back to you. A lot of acronyms out there. There's PQC, QKD. Can you give us, I mean, you mentioned PQC a little bit, but would you maybe elaborate what these acronyms are and why they're important and how they overlap with cybersecurity?
Sure. Well, you know, Y2Q, I think you mentioned earlier, is a play on the Y2K bug from 2000, right? And so I think Y2Q is meant to indicate the day that, you know, a shore-capable machine becomes available and can potentially compromise, you know, not just contemporary communication, but anything that's been recorded in the past. So that date is in the future, and I don't know when it is. As we just mentioned, I think it depends on your risk tolerance when you should place that date specifically. PQC is post-quantum cryptography or post-quantum crypto systems, and those are the crypto systems we just talked about that we believe would be immune to attack by a quantum computer. Now, in some sense, we were just unlucky that the crypto system we chose for public key exchange, being the RSA type crypto systems, we were just unlucky that those are a category or a class that happen to be susceptible to attack by a quantum computer, and Peter Shor found the algorithm to do it. But there are other crypto systems that, again, we believe would be immune to attack, and those go by this acronym PQC. They're being developed and tested, stress tested this year. They may even be released this year, a first one. But that's not the end of it, because it's going to take us a good 5 to 10 years to fully implement and get them into not just the software. The software is, I would say, relatively straightforward, but there are many hardware uses of these crypto systems, and that hardware has to be switched over as well. So it's a challenging problem, but you know, we're not going to finish it until we start it. We need to get started on it right now.
Well, you know, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the last acronym you mentioned, QKD, is quantum key distribution. And so quantum mechanics affords us the ability to attack certain crypto systems. That's Shor's algorithm. But quantum key distribution, you know, quantum also gives back to us a means to securely exchange keys. And that is what's called quantum key distribution. And we could talk more about that if you would like to.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to talk a little bit more about that, if you don't mind. I think there's a lot of people that are asking about that right now. And, you know, I was in a meeting today. Somebody was talking about using satellites to do it, or even a terrestrial way. Can you mind just talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So quantum key distribution is a means to exchange a key between, say, usually it's called Alice and Bob, and then E is the eavesdropper in between, and the eavesdropper wants to intercept the key as we're trying to send it between Alice and Bob. And one unique feature of quantum mechanics is that we can't clone information, quantum mechanic. We can't clone an unknown quantum state. And so if I encode some information into a quantum state and I send it to you, Steve, if an eavesdropper in any way touches, looks, tries to infer what that state is, that will leave a telltale signature that you and I both recognize, and we can just throw that data away because it has the potential of being compromised. So, you know, without going too deeply into how this works, QKD is a method to use quantum mechanics to securely exchange information, which means we could exchange a key, for example, and then we could, in fact, continually refresh that key so that we're basically using a one-time pad to communicate. I'll also mention that quantum mechanics and the measurement process is one of the purest forms of randomness that we know of. And randomness is the foundation for crypto systems, because if something is truly random, it means there's no pattern. And if there's no pattern, then we can't divine from it, the patterns that allow us to decrypt and discover. Now, the maybe one thing to say about QKD is that it is susceptible to denial of service attacks, right? If you just keep looking at it, then I never get anything to you that's not been compromised. And the last thing I'll say is you mentioned satellites. The reason that that's interesting is that when we communicate, typically it's by photons, light here on Earth. And over a metropolitan-sized city, say 50, 100 kilometers, that metropolitan scale, we can communicate without losing too much of the light along the way. But longer than that, say coast to coast, right, in the US, we would need something called a quantum repeater. People are working on it. We don't have it yet. But what we could do is go straight up to a satellite, right? And then from satellite to satellite, now that's basically in space. The light doesn't get absorbed in space. It can go from satellite to satellite and then back down to Earth. And that is a way that we can communicate over longer distances. So implementing QKD by satellite is an interesting approach. And some groups around the world have demonstrated this.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, no, I've a lot of conversation coming up in this, and trying to find ways to actually help and actually combat cybersecurity. I guess, Eric, I'm going to come back to you on the cyber side and the FBI. How does the FBI address cyber threats that have been changing over the last 5 years? I mean, it's a massive task.
Yeah, I think probably the best answer to that and the biggest change we made is our engagement with private sector and academia to team up against these threats. Like, look, we are the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That is what we are good at. We're good at investigating. But I am clearly not an expert in quantum mechanics. I am clearly not an expert in quantum computing, but Will is. And these are the types of relationships that the Bureau seeks out proactively to engage with the experts in the U.S. That's how we'll do it. There was a stigma many years ago that the Bureau shows up at your door and they're going to take all your computers and kind of shut you down. That is the opposite of how we investigate crimes. We have a very, very solid policy of never re-victimizing the victim, and frankly, we're there to be with you, to work the case with you, to find the adversary with you. So our engagement with the private sector, from when things after they happen, but more importantly, to what our relationships with the private sector and academia before things happen. A very popular phrase in the military: you got to get left of boom, and that's what we try to do. We want to be proactive, not reactive. We want to be in front of the problem, and the only way we do that is conversations like this. I mentioned InfraGard earlier. That's a huge advantage of InfraGard, is that they have face-to-face communications with the agents and analysts from the Bureau in their AOR, right in their backyard. And so when a problem does happen, they know who to go to talk to. And so it's having those conversations, it's being proactive, it's making sure that we're pushing intelligence out to the companies that need it before the problem actually happens.
Got it. No, I mean, I think that's a really good approach. And how do you combat that? Will, can I come to you back? I know you mentioned PQC a couple times, and you talk about it's got the word quantum in it. Is PQC truly quantum?
No, it's not. That's a great point to make. Is that post-quantum crypto systems? The Q means what are we going to do after we have a quantum computer, but it means, what are we going to do on our conventional computers after the advent of a large-scale quantum computer? So those post-quantum crypto systems are not quantum. They're classical. They'll run on the computers we're using right now for this streaming session. But what we believe strongly, based on everything we know, is that these new crypto systems will be, quote, immune to attack by a quantum computer. That doesn't mean a quantum computer can't attack it. It just means it would take a very long time for a quantum computer to break such a post-quantum crypto system. Just like it takes our conventional computers a very long time to hack RSA.
Got it. Excellent. And so, Eric, I'm going to come back to you. I've got just a couple more questions, and then I'll open it up. I know I've been getting some chats here of people having issues logging on to the technology. So, Eric, how do you see these new technologies changing the cyber threat? Oh no, I've already asked that one, didn't I? What keeps you up at night, Eric? What are the things that are going on that keeps you up at night?
Yeah, so as we talk about some of these tools and some of these emerging technologies, I think that our adversary will become more advanced, but not necessarily more skilled, if that makes sense. We're by utilizing smart technologies, emerging technologies, it doesn't take someone as long to become proficient in cybercrime. So like I think of AI, for example. If AI is used correctly, the adversary kind of skips a few steps, skips the learning curve per se to actually be able to deploy some of these pieces of malware, ransomware, whatnot. The idea that they could be used against operational technology, that's always something that's kept me up at night. Control systems, ICS, SCADA, anything that could have a kinetic impact based off of actual cyber activity. That's something that's always bothered me. We've seen it happen in warfare. So cyber kind of setting the stage, prepping the battlefield per se, for then to follow on with actual military engagement. That's the type of stuff that we're always worried about. We're always thinking about, and things like quantum and AI and other emerging technologies are only going to make that easier. Got it.
And so, Will, going back to that, we're talking about the state of quantum today, and what can we learn from kind of the evolution of the conventional classical computation, and what does that mean for quantum computing and maybe our expectations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, quantum has a lot of promise, and as human beings, we get excited about technologies that have a lot of promise, and as a result, we think, this is just going to happen tomorrow, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're excited about it, and there is a lot of hype right now, and that hype exists surrounding quantum computing, and that hype exists because there's so much problem and because we're so excited about it. But we have to be careful and cognizant that this is a hard technology to build, and it's going to take time. And what I learned from looking back at, say, the 20th century development of classical electronic computers is exactly that. The vacuum tube was invented in 1906, I believe, and we didn't have a vacuum tube computer until 1946, 40 years later. The transistor was invented in 1947, and about 10 years after that, we had a fully transistor-based computer called TX0 built here at MIT, but we basically soldered those transistors together. It wasn't an integrated circuit. The integrated circuit was invented in the late 50s, but it wasn't until the 70s that Intel had a 4004 processor, a 4-bit processor in a calculator, basically. It was very, very, by today's standard, very weak. It would take another 25 years to get the Pentium Pro, which probably many of us remember as a fantastic computer in 1995, or computer chip, that had, quote, only millions of transistors on it, right? A revolution at the time, but And since then, it's been another 25 years to get to the billions of transistors on these multi-core processors that we have today, and even graphical processing units. So if you look from the first demonstration of a logic element to these fantastic computers we have today, it's over 100 years, right? So now that doesn't mean that we should just throw in the towel and wait for it to happen, because the journey is what enables it to happen. You know, if we didn't do the development in the 40s and 50s for classical computers that were, by today's standard, extremely, you know, early and naive and weak, of course we wouldn't get to where we are today. And so quantum computing, similarly, the quantum computers we have today are very small. And they have maybe 50 to 100 or a few hundred qubits. Those qubits are highly, you know, susceptible to errors. And they're not capable today of running commercial scale algorithms that we're all imagining we wanted to do. And it's not just Shor's algorithm, right? For commercialization, it's about quantum simulation and simulating new materials, quantum chemistry, things that will enable us to build and engineer, you know, new technologies. But to get to that point, we have to build a large scale quantum computer, and that's going to take time. How long? It's hard to say. But it's not going to be 1 or 2 years, right? Just as when the transistor was invented in 47, it wasn't 1 or 2 years to have iPhones, right? We have to keep the perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, it's funny. I dealing in this industry, I see a lot of people kind of talking about different things and different approaches, and it's interesting on how different companies are approaching when it'll happen. You know, I love technology. I'm an optimist, and for me, I always look at the opportunity and see. So I need people like you, Will, to help kind of ground me and help me realize what is real and what's hype. And there's a lot of hype. Obviously, we're seeing the hype on the AI stuff, seeing the hype on quantum stuff, and a lot of people talking about that.
Yeah, I might just add one more thing though, is that, you know, if you look at the companies today that are making these high power, you know, complex chips, these companies were in it for decades, right? And you know, so they didn't wait for somebody else to do it. It is such a complex technology, transistor-based chips, that you can't just jump in once somebody else figures it out. You got to be part of the development. And I believe it will be the same for quantum computing, because it is also an example of a very challenging and hard technology. And so the folks that are struggling and working very hard to realize this promise today are the ones who are going to take advantage of it in the future.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, and that's kind of why I'm in this early. Hey, so I've seen a question come up, Eric. It's for you, and really asking about how the FBI handles kind of the rise in deep fakes. Is that something that you can talk about, or because that is an issue? You start seeing it everywhere, and you know, now with you know, information out there, how do you know what's real and what's not real?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're conscious of it, and it's a huge problem. But it's a problem that you know, that we're not afraid to face head on. We're well aware of it. You know, we have teams back at headquarters that kind of specialize in assisting with incidents like that, with our field investigators out in the field. Probably can't go too much more into detail about it, but just know that well aware of it, and we're actively working against it.
Excellent. Will, I've got one here, and see. What in this event? What's the role of quantum on smart cities?
Oh, that interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. It's interesting. I don't naturally make the connection to smart cities. I think of quantum as a technology that basically, let me say, is what I might call a second order technology, in the sense that quantum computers, for example, in the commercial space at least, will simulate materials, for example, and maybe then an engineer can use what we learned from that simulation to build a better battery. So that's the second step, right? The first step is simulating better materials, or simulating reaction rates in chemistry. and then somebody else takes that information, an engineer or a scientist, and does something with it. For example, maybe designing a pharmaceutical drug rather than just testing a whole bunch of ideas in parallel, hoping that one of them works.
Okay, excellent. I need everybody to go ahead and submit your questions so that we can go through it. Maybe Will, you can start thinking about it. From my mind, what's the thing that most excites you? I guess we'll talk about quantum, and Eric will talk about cyber, and kind of in that. So, what's the most exciting part of what you think in the future we'll be able to combat? And the other one is, what's kind of the most fearful, both on both technologies?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, of course, this is my passion. I love doing the research and the science. So for me, that's what motivates me. In the future, I think we've talked about how quantum computers may be able to simulate much more efficiently materials or chemical reactions and the like that would enable us to engineer a better world. And I think that's the promise that we know. But again, if we think 50 or 100 years in the future, we have no idea how these quantum computers or quantum technologies, quantum sensors, quantum communication technologies are going to work. And for me, that's the real promise here, is that we know that our world is quantum mechanical. We know that. And so the idea that we would develop technologies that at a fundamental level use quantum mechanics for purpose, for advantage, that's the real promise. And specifically how we would use it, I don't think we truly understand that today, just as people in the 50s didn't understand how, conventional computers would be used in today's world in 2024.
Okay, that's kind of the exciting part. I'll go to Eric, and Eric can tell me about the exciting stuff of cyber, and then we can come to the concerns.
Yeah, so I would say I think probably the thing I'm most excited about is that when we talk about cybersecurity today, we're thinking of it ahead of the technology, which that's never the way we've done it in the past, right? So the really big brains, really smart people that are in the think tanks that are coming up with the next great thing or technology, they're already thinking of security layers and how to protect it and so that it's used properly. Honestly, cybersecurity and rightfully so. Like, why would we have thought that it should have mattered when we were designing the internet protocol? Like TCP/IP wasn't originally designed with that layer of security in it, right? So now that we're doing this going forward with our new technologies, that's what excites me, is that we can be in front of it, so that when problems do occur outside, we're thinking ahead of the problem, and that's what I really appreciate about kind of the way that we're moving forward with technology.
Got it. Appreciate that. Will, concerns?
Yeah, well, as with most technologies, there are dual uses. There are uses which are good for the benefit of humankind, and then it can also be misused. And I think it behooves us to think ahead, much in the same way that Eric was just mentioning, to think ahead of how these technologies could be misused and try to avoid that outcome, right? Or at least understand the implications of that outcome. I don't personally think it helps, for example, in the context of Shor's algorithm, to say, okay, full stop, we're not going to develop quantum computers because they may crack codes. Because that often ends up being a unilateral decision and somebody else develops it, and now we're behind if we decided to take that unilateral action. So we do need to develop it, but we absolutely need to be cognizant of the dual uses and stay ahead of the game in that respect.
Got it. And then how about you, Eric?
Yeah, I would just echo exactly what Will said. As much as I just talked about how excited I am and how excited I think all of us are about emerging technologies, like if you left the call today with not being a little bit paranoid, then I don't think I did my job. It is scary potentially what adversaries could do with technologies like this. So just having that understanding, it doesn't mean we shouldn't evolve, doesn't mean we shouldn't innovate. But what it means is we just need to be aware of what it could be used for.
maybe let me ask a position on this, right? So with AI and kind of with ChatGTP coming out and making that accessible to everybody, we actually, you would say they put that technology in everybody's hands. I think with quantum, though, it's going to be different because the number of machines, the access to the premium machines, it's not going to be in the hands of just everybody. And for nefarious actors to get their hands on it, it would be a lot more difficult. So what would you say to somebody that would say, well, yeah, no, that's good, and I understand what these different technologies. Quantum's different because for you to actually be able to execute, do this, first you have to, it's very technical, it's very complex, and you have to have access to these very hard to get access to computers. What would you say to that? Maybe Will.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that reflects the status of the world today, that these quantum computers are very difficult to build. And as a result, they're very small today. We haven't built yet a large scale quantum computer that, for example, could do Shor's algorithm. And much like the first conventional computers were of a mainframe type, taking up an entire room, accessed by people who actually walked up to the terminal and worked with that computer, quantum computers similarly will take up an entire room, and as you just described, Steve, that they will be accessed by people who have access to them. That's right. But I think it would be naive to think that it's going to remain that way forever, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know when this technology becomes more pervasive or accessible, but in a 30 or 50 or 100-year time frame, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, I do believe that quantum will become the way that we do many of these tasks, and in ways that we just don't foresee right now. So, but I think you're right. For the foreseeable 1, 2, 3 decades, it will be mainframe type machines in a big room where the access is controlled in some way, whether that's controlled by governments or by the commercial entity that owns the machine.
Yeah. Eric, I don't know, do you want to say anything to that?
Yeah. Again, I think Will just absolutely hit it on the head. It simply brings to mind that, as Will mentioned, the first computers were giant mainframes in buildings, right? Who could ever imagine that anyone would want a computer in their home? Then they decided, hey, who could ever imagine that someone would want a portable computer that they could take with them? I mean, that's crazy, right? Wait, who could imagine that you'd want a computer in your phone, right? So it's about the idea that we're not thinking about the problem today. We're not thinking about the problem tomorrow. We're thinking about what the problem might be 10, 15 years from now. And I think that's just the way to look at it.
Right. And I think the big case for that, and Will, I think you alluded to it, it's about people maybe capturing data and storing it. And so, yes, you've got this encrypted data today, which you can't do anything with it. But what happens 10, 15 years when a computer is strong enough to break that encryption? Is that data still valuable? So all the data we're actually passing on our phones, email, everything, are you comfortable that in 10, 15 years, all of that will be accessible? It's something that people need to kind of think about, right?
Yeah, that's right. And for any individual or company, it's a risk benefit analysis. How important is this information to remain secure? When do you think a Shor capable machine will arrive? And different companies or different people will come to different conclusions on that, but people should be thinking about it and coming to a conclusion so that they're aware and ready for what's coming. And as we talked about, moving to a post-quantum crypto system as soon as possible is part of the strategy that we have.
Eric, I know that, and I didn't kind of send this to you before, but technologies, you're agnostic because you guys are about any technology to be used against you. Are there any big technologies that are like top of mind? I'm sure AI is up on that list. Any technology, any other technologies?
Obviously, you absolutely hit it right. AI is something that we're really, really invested in researching and understanding better, and how to use it, and how to fight against it. Crypto tracing is still a big part of what we're doing now. The adversary loves crypto. So being able to trace crypto, find wallets, to do that type of work, or any virtual assets, is really important technology that we're working really hard to get smart on.
Excellent. Excellent. Will, I've got a question here for you. In context of quantum technologies advancements, what potential economic shocks or disruptions do you anticipate, and how can businesses and policy makers strategically prepare to navigate and harness opportunities within this evolving landscape?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question, right? Let me start with the second part. How do businesses strategically prepare? It's becoming quantum aware. It's understanding the problems that you have, first and foremost, that could be solved by a quantum computer, and then understanding how a quantum computer might help solve that problem. What is the algorithm? And I encourage people to develop algorithms. We need more algorithms, and we need specific algorithms. And it's important work to do, because that motivates us building quantum computers. And so with that, a company will understand, okay, here's an important problem. Here is an algorithm, important problem that I have. Here's an algorithm that a quantum computer could use to solve it. And then now I understand how big a quantum computer I need for it to be commercially relevant to me and my company, right? And once you know that, you know what to look for, and you're ready. And I think that helps mitigate any surprise downstream of the advent of a quantum computer. Now, what policymakers can do and are doing is also to be quantum aware and to understand where not just we are in the US, but where countries are around the world, and the groups, and which technology platforms are promising, which ones may be up and coming. They're not promising yet, but might be in 10, 20 years. It's also about developing the industrial ecosystem to support the development of quantum computers. That's key. And not just quantum computers, but also quantum sensors and quantum communication technologies. And of course, supporting the research at early stages, research and development. It's both science and engineering. With classical computers, I think we know that the US government, for example, played a very important role in the 40s and 50s and 60s in the development of that technology before it became commercially viable to stand on its own. And I believe that governments will have a similar role to play in quantum computing development. They can both fund that research and development, but they can also develop or put incentives in place so that the commercial ecosystem develops, and eventually the goal would be that commercialization takes over.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, good. We're almost at the end of this. I guess, Eric, any parting words, anything that you think? I know we're talking about technology, right? And we talk about cyber. And I think everybody likes to focus on the nice, shiny technology, and the technology is the problem. But I think a lot of what cyber happens is kind of just humans taking advantage of other humans in different ways. It has nothing to do with technology. Is that right, or is that just by perception? That's the problem.
No, that's a great point, Steve. We've talked about advanced tools and emerging technologies today, and all the really high-tech stuff that can be used. But at the end of the day, most adversaries are going to take the low-hanging fruit. They're going to find the easiest way they can get in, and they're going to use that because why? It takes less effort, right? So perfect example is phishing is still the number one attack vector for basically all of cybercrime. A simple phishing email is still the number one way to do it, because you send out 10,000 phishing emails with a click of a button, and you only need one person to click on the link, right, for it to work. So that's still the kind of the fight that we fight. It goes back to social engineering too. My wife was just telling me recently about a client of hers who took a phone call and took some bad advice from an adversary over the phone and was had lots of money stolen. So it's simple things like that still work. So while we are absolutely cognizant of emerging technologies and advanced tech, we have to understand that be vigilant and diligent when it comes to kind of questioning things, right? And just it never hurts to check twice. It never hurts to make sure what link you're clicking on is really what it should be, right? So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. There's still people on the other side of this, humans on the other side of that keyboard that they're looking for the easiest way in.
Well, the funny thing is, it just happened to me this morning, and I don't know why somebody would want to target me specifically, because it was target at me. Maybe it was because I'm doing this course, and they wanted to kind of show me. But I was sitting at breakfast with my wife, and as we're at breakfast, an email comes in and says, "Hey, this is Steve Suarez. I'm at a conference. I can't talk right now, but I need you to send me blank, blank, and blank." And she was like, "What's this about?" And I was like, "It's phishing." We looked at it. So even like somebody like me, anybody can be a target, and I saw it firsthand this morning. So I was wondering if it was just a coincidence that I was doing a LinkedIn Live event on cybersecurity.
Right. Yeah. No, and yeah, I know we're joking a little bit here, but to be perfectly honest, like, think of how different it is, how more public our personas are with the advent of social media compared to pre-social media. LinkedIn especially, like the purpose of LinkedIn, right, is to have your professional profile out there and to connect and network. Well, that's a great tool for any adversary to go and do some reconnaissance. Right. And so they know that Steve Suarez from Horizon X is holding a cybersecurity brief today, and he's going to be in a conference call for the next hour. So yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Will, any parting comments or questions before we adjourn today's call?
No, I just, thank you, Steve, for putting this together, and it was a pleasure to talk with both you and Eric. I would just remind people that, quantum computing is happening. It's real. It's probably going to take longer than any of us would like to happen, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. And, just be aware of how quantum will impact, for companies, your bottom line in the future. And, I think being aware is the best way to be on top of advances in quantum computing. It's going to take time. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of promise. There's a lot of hype. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate the time.
No. And thank you to both of you. I know you guys are joining from the US early in the morning out there. Thanks for getting up early. I know there's a lot of people that I've been like inundated in LinkedIn saying, I can't get in. So I've got to make sure I figure out that technology. So maybe a year from now, let's just aim for next January. I might get you guys both back on, and we can kind of talk about the evolution and how things have gone. But big thank you, Eric, and thank you for joining and talking to us about the FBI's point of view on cybersecurity. And Will, as always, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and talking about quantum and a lot of things coming this way. And I know you're actually in the process of revamping your course on quantum. So that'll be nice and exciting for this community to pay attention to.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, just I guess a plug there is if you would like to learn more about quantum, MIT X Pro has a professional development course series. Just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to connect you if you'd like to learn more about quantum and what's coming.
Excellent. And so for everybody else, thank you for joining. If you're watching this either live or on recording, please sign up and follow us at Horizon X. We're going to be trying to put this type of quality content out there so that you can keep up to date and know what's going out there. So with that, I want to thank you guys, and you guys have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.